But first, Donald Trump won the second most votes of any US presidential candidate in history this week. But unfortunately for him, his rival Joe Biden won the most, and the former vice president will move into the White House in January. But what will a Biden presidency mean for the United Kingdom? Well, a man with a few thoughts about that is the former Chancellor Sajid Javid, who joins us now. Thank you very much for being with us, Mr. Javid. So, did the best man win?
I think so, yes. I did think that it's the right outcome, not just for the US. That's a decision, of course, for the US people, but it's the best outcome for the UK as well. I'm pleased it was a clear result, a clear sweep of the Electoral College, a win of the popular vote as well. And I also think, no matter what your politics, it will be just good for us all to have some civility, some integrity and seriousness back in the White House.
I mean, you're obviously a Conservative, but does that mean you would have voted for Joe Biden?
Look, I don't have a vote in this. It's rightly a decision for the American people. But we are right to think about how this decision, the leader of the most powerful country in the world, how does it impact us? And I think it's good news. And I think it's good news for us for a number of reasons, because, of course, Joe Biden will rightly govern in US interest, just as we govern in our own interests. But I think there's a lot of crossover, a lot of mutual interest, far more than there ever was with a Trump administration. So if you look at 3 or 4 of the biggest issues right now, the pandemic, for example, he will certainly be taking it more seriously, as we do. He's already said he's going to rejoin the World Health Organization. We'll be chairing the G7 next year, for example. That means we can work on a global recovery plan with a man in the White House that is a multilateralist, understands the need for international combined action. When it comes to trade, Joe Biden believes in free trade. Donald Trump was a protectionist. And then also, for example, when it comes to climate change, we'll be hosting the world's largest, a seriously important climate change conference next year. We'll be chairing that. And right now, we will, with the new leader of the White House, we will have someone who will want to work with us to bring about change.
Interesting to get your take on that. Now, of course, Donald Trump refused to accept the result of the election. He's called some votes illegal. He even said that counting should be stopped. How concerned are you about the response to the election from Donald Trump?
Look, I think in saying those things, he's already done a huge amount of damage to democracy, both at home in his own country and frankly, abroad. The US is a beacon of democracy across the world, as we are, and it's doing damage. It's still doing damage because he hasn't stopped. And if we think of today, in a couple of hours from now, our whole nation will have a moment of silence to remember those who fought for our freedoms, our democracy, and it's a reminder of just how fragile democracy is. We are privileged to have democracy. The Americans are privileged to have it. There are so many people around the world that yearn for democracy, and the behaviour of the US president has frankly been adolescent behaviour, and I hope that serious people around him take him aside and tell him to stop and put an end to this.
You're talking there about the fragility of democracy and the damage that Donald Trump is doing to democracy by his reaction to the election result. But on Friday, Downing Street repeatedly refused to say that every vote in the US election should be counted. I mean, it doesn't sound like that's a controversial statement. How can we stand up for the importance of democracy when we can't even say that every vote should be counted in a democratic election?
Well, look, first of all, I'd say I'm proud of what the UK does to stand up for democracy across the world, especially the work that we do with many developing nations through our aid programme and stuff to strengthen their democracy and governance. And to your question, I think it's actually quite right that a serving UK minister doesn't really comment at all on the internal workings of another country's the elections, especially as they are ongoing and there's no result. If I'm not standing in front of you today as a minister, but if I were, I wouldn't have the flexibility and the freedoms to say what I am, and your ministers will naturally be more careful in what they say, and that's quite right.
At the same time, though, they're not being asked to comment on the election. They're not being asked to comment on what they think of the result or anything like that, or who they think should win. It seems to be a very uncontroversial statement that every vote should be counted, doesn't it?
Of course, that's something I think anyone who believes in democracy would welcome, that in any election you count every vote. And what we've seen here, though, in the US case, it's the sitting president actually encouraging people not to count the vote. But as I say, I think that the vast majority of people, that when they hear those comments from President Trump, would not agree with him. And I know that certainly would be the case in the UK government. But you wouldn't expect the UK government to give some kind of running commentary on the US election.
Now, when you were Home Secretary under Theresa May, you weren't invited to a state banquet with Donald Trump, even though other more junior ministers were. You described the decision at the time as a bit odd. Do you think that we haven't done enough to stand up to for our values with Donald Trump in the past?
No, I think clearly we don't choose who the US president is. Once the American people have made that decision, we're going to, of course, work with that US president. And also, let's be straight, whilst I'm pleased with this election result, Donald Trump does have some achievements to his name, things that we've worked with him on in his own country. His economy is stronger. He created more jobs. Internationally, he's sought to create more peaceful relationships between Israel and its Arab neighbors. So, we will work with the US when it suits us. I think what makes sense now is that there's so much more mutual interest in the kind of things I've mentioned on trade, on climate change, on recovery in the global economy, the pandemic. And so all of that means I think we can just work much more closely together. And this is coming at a time when we are taking chairmanship of many of these multilateral organizations. And you need an international partner. You need someone who's a multilateralist, like Joe Biden is, that respects international rules. And as we sort of leave the EU and we have an exciting future ahead of us, we need to work with partners across the world that also respect international rules, because we'll be relying on those now more than ever, the WTO rules, for example. And having someone in the White House that has that respect for international rules is going to be really important.
At the same time, though, some will be wondering if it's actually true that we will have a better relationship with Joe Biden on things like trade. I mean, Donald Trump, of course, has said that the UK would have been at the front of the queue for any post-Brexit trade deal. He's talked about the importance of the special relationship. We know, of course, he believed in Brexit, unlike Joe Biden, who said he would have voted Remain. Are you not worried that actually a trade deal with Joe Biden in the White House is going to be harder to achieve?
No, not at all. In fact, I think a trade deal with Joe Biden is far more likely. And let's look at the evidence. Let's look at what Donald Trump actually did when he was in office, when it came to trade with the UK. He slapped tariffs on UK aluminium, UK steel, Scotch whisky, and that not only hurt people in America in terms of higher prices, but it also cost jobs here in the UK. President Trump is a protectionist. He's been very clear about that. He's paralyzed the WTO. We now want to strike more trade deals across the world, and actually what you need is a president that believes in free trade, and that's what we're going to have with Joe Biden.
At the same time, though, some would also worry about the relationship that Boris Johnson and Joe Biden are going to have, particularly in light of previous comments that Boris Johnson has made, referring to Barack Obama as part Kenyan, saying that Hillary Clinton looks like a sadistic mental health nurse. I mean, he's going to have some ground to wake up with Joe Biden, isn't he, after insulting some of his friends and colleagues?
I think people are wrong to be concerned about that because, first of all, the UK-US relationship is indispensable. There have been, over the last few decades, let's think there's been many presidents and prime ministers, and whoever those personalities have been, that relationship has remained strong because it's far bigger than personalities. The second thing I'd say, actually, is that I personally believe that the whole sort of thing about Boris Johnson and Donald Trump being close is completely overstated. They had a good, strong working relationship based on practical cooperation. And I have no doubt that when Boris Johnson and Joe Biden speak, they'll hit it off straight away and they'll build up a rapport because, if nothing else, they've got so many mutual interests.
Now, I'm keen to talk a little bit to you about lockdown and the economy as well, obviously as a former Chancellor. The government's just announced that they're going to be extending the furlough scheme into March. The Bank of England's been printing more money. We know, of course, that job cuts will be coming. How concerned are you about the state of the economy, and what do you think unemployment could look like?
When the UK government, and understandably, along with many other governments across the world, when we decided to have a lockdown, especially that original lockdown, clearly when you stop consumers from consuming, producers from producing, you're going to have an economic crisis. And in that moment, what you need to do is set out policies that will support the economy for a quick recovery when you can start lifting these restrictions. So first of all, I think that is exactly what Rishi Sunak and the Treasury team have done. I'd commend them for it. I think they've done, given the circumstances, they've done an excellent job. They keep trying to sort of improve interventions. We've seen that in the last few weeks. And like anyone, of course, I'm hugely concerned about the economic damage that the pandemic has done across the world. And it's really, really important that as we recover, as we get to the other side of the pandemic, that we don't withdraw the support that's been provided to the economy quickly. We take our time and we manage finances in a way that we continue to provide support to the sectors that are going to need it most.
At the same time, though, UK debt's now bigger than GDP. We don't know how long this is going to go on for. There's going to be some really difficult decisions coming up on how to help the economy, how to balance the books, what to do. I mean, you've described yourself as a low-tax kind of guy, but taxes are going to have to go up, aren't they?
As the Chancellor has said, we're going to have to eventually confront the public finances and bring them back under control. Now is not the time, but eventually we'll have to do that. And I think the best way to do that, by the way, is to control public spending even more tightly. The Chancellor was right, I think, recently to postpone the full spending review and to do that sometime next year, when we can, I think, take our time and look at spending in every government department and do what I call a zero-based spending review. And I know, I've ran 5 government departments, and I can tell you in every government department there are substantial savings and efficiencies that can be made. Now, you mentioned taxes, and I'm not going to pretend with you for a second that you're going to be able to avoid having to raise some taxes. Clearly we're going to have to pay for not just some of that debt, but we're going to have to pay for extra spending in areas like health and social care. And that will mean some taxes somewhere will have to go up. Now's not the time to do that. And when taxes are changed, I think it's really important that it is not taxes that hit work incentives or hit businesses.
OK, Sajid Javid, really interesting to talk. Thank you very much for being on the programme today.